We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers, the government controllers, the spirits of wickedness in the heavenly places. We were just driving along in my truck talking, and all of a sudden, he just pinned himself against the seat in the door and said, "Oh, we need to turn around. We need to get out of here. This is a bad place." There are really powerful spirits, like 40, 50 feet tall. There are over 50 of them here. Besides that, they're looking at us right now. The Bible says, "Your brother's righteous blood cries to me from the earth." That's a real thing. When people are slain, their blood calls out for vengeance. Sometimes their voices do. Human governments were given to mankind. When the leader yields himself to a certain spirit, it has huge influence in the nation. When you have an affinity with the spirit and invite it, your invitation gives it topos. They did that to cause a huge, powerful spirit, the dragon spirit from China, to come and establish its nest here. Now, Bacchae, the dragon of this area, resides out there in the buttes. We are only covered by the grace of God when we are doing what Jesus has asked us to do. In doing that, we will be indirectly fighting against principalities, the cosmic traitors, the spirits of malicious plots. And the way you defeat a general is to defeat all of his soldiers.
All right, everybody, welcome back to the Holy Living Podcast. We're sitting here again with Pastor Dave Bryan from Glad Tidings Church out in Yuba City, California. Pastor Dave, we're super excited to have you back. Thank you for joining us again.
It's really great to be back with you, Gabriel. Yes. It's good to see you both, your smiling faces. I mentioned your wife has one of the best smiles ever, but it's good to see you both and to be back on Holy Living Podcast. Thank you.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And like I said, it feels like your family. So I know we're in Christ, but it just does. So thank you for coming back.
Absolutely.
Oh, my pleasure.
So last time we talked a lot about the spirit realm. It was right around Halloween, so obviously we talked about that. Couldn't not talk about that. That's a major, kind of a big deal. This time we wanted to dig a little bit more into talking about some of the, I used the word before, landscape, or some of the power structures of the governments of the spirit realm. The Apostle Paul in Ephesians 6 talks about, we don't wrestle against flesh and blood, but against the authorities, cosmic powers, principalities, spiritual forces of wickedness in heavenly places. And we see some examples of that in, say, Daniel chapter 10, where you hear, Michael is called the prince over Israel, and then there's reference to the prince of Persia and the prince of Greece, talking about these angelic powers. For anybody who's familiar with the work of Dr. Michael Heiser, and we spoke about this briefly earlier, there's a understanding in the Bible from Deuteronomy 32, Psalm 82, and some other places about really this hierarchy of these angelic princes who have been given governance over different nations and people groups and things. And those who've rebelled have become part of the power structure of the kingdom of darkness. And so we really wanted to just unpack that with you, because I've heard some of your stories before in some of your other podcasts and your Isaiah 61 conference training about the, shameless plug, hold it up there.
You can get this, which is really cool. It's not a bullet. It's not a bullet.
USB drive from Glad Tidings Church you could ever find.
Yeah, don't try to take that in your purse through an airport. They'll find it.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
But you guys can get that on their. We'll link it in the description below. You guys can get that on their website.
Yes.
But anyway, where's it going? You have some amazing stories, kind of just shedding light on what this kind of actually looks like. So we'd love to get into some of that with you and hear your teaching and your experience. What that looks like even on a national level, especially with President Trump saying he's going to rededicate the country back to the Lord. What are the implications of that? And then down to the personal level, how does this affect us as believers? How does this affect our spiritual and mental, emotional well-being, our families, etc. So that's
leadership at work.
And yeah, at our leadership, how does leadership affect that and play into that?
Yeah.
So
yeah. Well, that's quite a comprehensive topic. But I first want to say that though I was never able to meet him personally, I loved Michael Heiser. Wrote, I think I've read every book he's written and every paper. God really used him to make plain to people the economy of God with the sons of God and the divine council. That phrase has always been around, but it was never really popular until Michael Heiser began to unpack what is the divine council, what is being talked about in the divine council. And I really thank God for the work he did. I think it was really profound. But the Bible, of course, makes different references to ruling spirits. And the verse that you quoted is the most quoted verse talking about it. And that's that we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers. And then depending on what translation you use, there are the government controllers. The Greek word is kosmokrators. And then there are spirits of wickedness in the heavenly places, though the word heavenly there is not so much about geography as it's talking about their rulers in the spirit world. The whole concept in the Bible about heaven is not so much a place as it's a dimension of being, so that we can be seated with Christ in the heavenlies. That doesn't mean we need to go somewhere, right? The Bible makes it plain that you and I can be seated with Christ in heavenly places. Again, a better translation is spiritual realities, spiritual dimensions. Christ made some statements that really make you scratch your head if you don't understand that, because he says the Son of Man is in the earth and in the heavens. And it's like, well, okay, well, which one? And his answer is yes, both. But anyway, so there are spiritual realities, but having said that, though the spiritual realities, and of course now what we're even referring to some of these spirits as interdimensional entities. They go from our dimension, which is the physical, into the spiritual dimension or the heavenly dimension. And the reason heavenly is a little awkward is because we think of the high heavens as the abode of God. But now when we're talking about heavenly places, we're not talking about the abode of God. We're talking about the second heavens, which are filled with rebellious spirits that have been kicked out of the high heaven during the cosmic revolt. And so it gets a little awkward trying to use heavenly to describe hellish beings, right? They're spirits that are ruling in the heavenly places, and it doesn't seem to really fit our mentality. But if we think about the high heavens as being the throne room of God, and then the second heavens as being what we refer to as space, and then the first heavens being the canopy of air that's around the planet, like the birds fly in the heavens. Well, obviously they can't fly in space, and they can't fly above that. But anyway, those are the three heavens that the Bible talks a lot about. and they overlap with the seven heavens, which divide the second heaven and third heaven into three parts each. But anyway, without going into that, we have the high heavens, the second heavens, where hell has an evil has set up its fortification to try to separate man from God, right? So you mentioned, Gabriel, the story of Daniel. And Daniel was a praying man, and he prayed for 21 days. But when the messenger angel, Gabriel, when he appeared to him, he said, from the first day you set your face to fasting and prayer, I was commissioned by God to bring you an answer. But I have been held back in the second heavens for 21 days. And, you know, that's quite a passage of scripture when you think about that. And, you know, there are a lot of lessons that can be taken out of that. But think of a face angel. Gabriel is one of those that stands before the face of God. And he mentions that when he announces himself, I'm Gabriel that stand before the face of the Almighty. But a very powerful angel, certainly not a Valentine's cherub, but a very powerful angel is coming, having been sent specifically by the Almighty with a message. And he still struggles for 21 days to get through the second heavens. And in that passage of scripture, he says that the reason he was granted access was not that he finally overcame the Prince of Persia, but he said that Michael came, and Michael overcame the Prince of Persia, and he was able to pass on. And then he even said that on his way back to the high heaven, the throne room of God, he would have to contend with the Prince of Greece, because the Prince of Persia had been displaced at that time by Michael, who, you know, fights for Israel and is the great warrior of the heavens. But anyway, that gives us some profound insight into what's happening, and it certainly helps define the second heavens, which was the region that was fortified by Lucifer and the fallen ones when they were cast out of the high heavens. They fortified the second heavens. They surrounded the earth, and they are there for the purpose that we see so clearly portrayed in Daniel. They are trying to cut off communication between God and those made in his image and likeness. And though we don't know all the dynamics of it, we know that our prayers are amazing. They ascend through the second heavens, but we also know that they can be picked off if they're defiled. For instance, Peter says, if you're not honoring your wife as you should, your prayers will be hindered. And so anyway, one of the things I think is important to recognize is we don't know what we don't know. And theology is always trying to act like we know everything. And it's like, oh, please. There are so many things that we don't know. And it's so freeing to just be able to say, I don't know about that. It makes you go, not sure what's up with that one. But it's okay to do that. And I've been quite outspoken about the abuses of the Catholic Church down through 2,000 years of history. But I will say this, one thing I appreciate about the Catholic Church is they have retained what they call the doctrine of mysteries. And they don't mind saying that's a mystery. Like, for instance, the incarnation. When you're all done thinking you understand the incarnation, You don't. How could God become a man? It's just like, if you're honest, your brain taps out on that one. Like, okay, somehow it happened. We're not sure how that happened. And, it's hard to think about God, like Jesus being fully God when Mary's changing his pampers. But anyway, the Catholics are okay with just saying this is a great mystery. And that they have a whole doctrine of mysteries that includes a lot of things that if the Protestants were more humble, that they would recognize the Catholics nailed it on a lot of the doctrine of mysteries. Like, we just don't know about that. So how about we just be honest about that? Like, I guess we didn't need to know. I'm convinced that we know everything that we need to know, or we have access at least to know everything that we need to know. And some things we don't really need to know. And so we don't have access to those things. And God will tell us on a need to know basis in eternity, But anyway, what we do know and what we can gather from Scripture is that there was a cosmic revolt in eternity past. We know it was before Adam and Eve were created. We know that it made the earth chaotic and void. We know that Satan was already Satan at that time. He was the dragon. And we know that he entered the history of man as the wicked one, the deceiver, the adversary. And so there had been a great cosmic revolt before that. And that is when Lucifer and those that he rallied to his cause, which a third of innumerable is a very big number. There are innumerable hosts, and a third of them fell with Lucifer. So that was quite an effective rallying of dissidents against God. And it points out a certain caliber and station of created beings that are called stars. And Lucifer was the chiefest among the stars, but a third of the stars fell with him. And I think it makes sense that because those are very, very high stations, that all of the watchers that were under that star and all the guardians that were under that star and all the warriors that were under that star, very likely that they fell as a group. I don't think it's very likely that Lucifer went over under somebody else's auspices and got some of their rank and file away. But I don't know that for sure. I'm just saying it seems like a third of the hosts fought against the other 2/3, and they were kicked out of the high heaven. They took over the command of the second heaven, and they seek access to the earth by consent of human beings. The Bible says the high heaven is the Lord's. The earth he has given to the sons of men, that they should rule over it. So that's why Lucifer, though very powerful, that's why he comes in through subtlety and deception to try to gain access to the realm of the earth. And so of course, that explains why humans are tempted, and explains a lot of things about why spirits are so active in putting their thoughts into the minds of men to try to get us to say, oh, okay, let's do it your way. Come on in. So anyway, there is a hierarchy. Now, in terms of explaining that, if you read ancient literature, it seems like everybody has a little different take on it. And for that matter, even Paul, we have the famous verse in Ephesians about principalities and powers and cosmocrators and deceptive spirits. But we also have him talking about thrones and dominions, and there are other references to watchers and to fallen watchers. The Bible references holy watchers and fallen watchers and guardians and different things. And then, of course, we have the mention of things that by extension we figure out, oh, wow, this is a very powerful being, like the seraphim, for instance, which if you go back into ancient literature, the seraphim are, the word for it is a fiery dragon. And I think Michael Heiser in one of his books brings this out. The reason it was never translated, it was left in transliteration form, which means they just leave the original word there rather than saying seraphim means fiery dragon. They just leave seraphim there for whatever reasons. The translator thought that was just a little too intense to let them know that there are fiery dragons that are in service to God. But personally, I think it's cool.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like to think of, you know, the dragons, us having nothing equivalent to that. You know, it's like, oh, all the dragons fell and they were the top of the food chain, and we're just trying to make up for it with chopped liver. But anyway, I think it's important to remember that everything that was created by God and for God. We have that specifically stated in Scripture. And that Lucifer has no creative power. He has the power to manipulate and pervert and shapeshift, do all kinds of things, but he can't create. And so that means for every kind of a being that is in the second heavens and the armies of the fallen ones, there's something roughly equivalent in the heavenly host where it started out as being the creation of God and glorious and beautiful and doing God's bidding. And then now it's in its warped and distorted form. Really, the same can be said about humanity. Sometimes it's hard to imagine how ugly people can get by embracing sin, and how beautiful people can be when they live in holiness and in right relationship with God. But all things are that way. And so whenever the Bible talks about some kind of a created being, which it mentions all kinds, and, you know, the Christian church kind of has, okay, an angel is 6'2" and blonde and blue-eyed, you know, and male usually, because they have to fight, as if all God's beings had to do all the same things, you know. But anyway, we stereotype it because it's easier for us to act like we understand everything. And then a demon has scales and a forked tail and cloven hooves and usually red, and they're slightly smaller than an angel because they ultimately have to lose. But the reality is much more diverse than that. And I don't know if we talked about this in our other conversations, but there is only one source of creative power. And everybody else that has a little inkling of creativity in them is borrowing it from God, the Almighty Creator. Mm-hmm. And so, again, I've mentioned the verse, everything, which excludes nothing. Everything that was created by God and for him, for his purposes. And so when you think about that, and you understand that God is himself eternal, meaning no beginning and no end. If you leave a creative person alone for a half hour in an office, they're going to draw a picture. They can't not. They'll find something to doodle on, right? Because they're creative. And you can imagine what God has created. No wonder he says there are innumerable hosts, because he's been creating things forever. And they'll never run out of things to create. And there may be things that are being created now that are God's bold new take on a variation. like, I'm going to improve the seraphim. Well, he's God. He can do that, right? He can create new stuff. And so there's seraphim and cherubim and oraphim and all kinds of things that are talked about in Scripture. And one of the worst things we can do is think that we have a hierarchy and we know everybody that's in place, and these answer to them and these answer to them. And I don't think we can do that. No one has ever done that conclusively. And, men have been trying for 6,000 years. So there's never been a conclusive list. But there are different books that do somewhat of a hierarchy, and usually they assume the same about the kingdom of darkness. So, there are the seven spirits of the Lord that stand before the throne of God, and those answer to what are commonly referred to as the seven Satans that stand before the throne of Lucifer or Satan. But anyway, more pertinent to our discussion is, which ones do we really fight with, and how do they manifest themselves? And we have a little more insight into that. So if we go back to Paul's list, and if we assume for a minute that the reason that he made the list was based on priority, he is teaching the Ephesians how to fight. And the Ephesian church was carved right out of the witchcraft of Diana of the Ephesians. So those were all witches and warlocks that heard about the gospel, and they burned their sorcery, their scribing tools and all. And if you look that up, it says that it was millions of dollars worth of stuff that was burned. It was not like a penny ante little fire. It was a big clean out of course, Ephesus. That's where the temple of Diana is built. And so that was a revival in the ranks of witches and warlocks. They knew a lot about spiritual things. And so Paul, in writing to that church that was birthed there, he talks about spiritual warfare. And that was really, Ephesians was the seat of Diana worship worldwide. And so that became, the Ephesian church became the seat of spiritual warfare understanding, and it spread out from there to other places. But I think it's safe to say he was talking about things that those people needed to be most concerned with. And again, since none of us know it all, it's okay for people to say, this is what I think about that, and that's the best I can do. But I will say this, that when you are casting out demons, you're not casting out principalities, you're casting out powers. And when you ask them, we say it like this: what is your name? But they'll never say, oh, my name's Henry, but you can call me Hank. My friends call me. Nah, it's not like that. If you ask their name, they'll tell you what their power is. And so you'll say, what's your name? They'll say, cancer's my power. Or, deception is my power, or perversion is my power, or they'll tell you what their power against humanity is. And of course they're sentient beings, and so it's not like they can only do one thing well, but they will have sort of like a military occupational status, right? It's sort of like, I'm a tail gunner. Could I use an M1? Yeah, but what I was trained for is I'm a tail gunner on a helicopter. So the powers are the foot soldiers of these demonic princes. And then my understanding of the principalities, the English word tells us something about it. It's a combination between a prince and a municipality. So it's a principality. And so that is the ruling spirit over a city. And smaller cities, generally speaking, have smaller principalities. Bigger cities have bigger principalities, and some cities have a tag team event going on where more than one prince is. There will always be one that is chiefest, but the Bible talks about different spirits that make covenants together. Like, for instance, in the prophets, it says death and destruction have made a covenant together against the people of this land. And that's a real thing. It's not just a figure of speech. And so there can be groups of principalities that are in a certain place. And so just to illustrate that point, I have a friend who was a very wealthy businessman, unsaved most of his life. And when he received Christ, his spiritual eyes were opened, and he said he was looking out across the ocean, and it was like a bright little cloud that got bigger and bigger and bigger. And when it got close and it enveloped him, he realized it wasn't a cloud at all. It was a portal that was opening, and it swallowed him, and he could see spirits. And he could see spirits all the time. And that's how we met. Is he was told by a trucker, there's a guy in Yuba City that you'd probably want to talk to, because Paul was telling these stories about, all the things he could see. And so anyway, he drove down from Crescent City, which is in Northern Cal. He drove down to Yuba City, and I wanted to see if he could actually see in the spirit realm. And I thought, I believe in Reaganomics, trust but verify, because I hear a lot of stuff, right?
Uh-huh.
And so it's like, well, maybe we'll see. So I was just talking to him casually, and I said, "Do you mind if we go on a drive?" Well, he didn't know that I was going out to Witch's Graveyard. And I thought, if this boy can see, he's going to notice it when we get out there. And we have Witch's Graveyard is at the base of Altar Rock, and Altar Rock is a waypoint between Mount Shasta and Mount Diablo. And it's very significant. And shaman and warlocks, they come and do blood sacrifices on a place that is in the middle of the Sutter Buttes called Altar Rock. And it's a high place, no different than the high places where they worship demons in biblical times. But anyway, they come out to that high place. It's the highest elevation around here, and they do human sacrifices, which is how we found out about the Witch's Graveyard. We used to have a crime unit that focused exclusively on occult related crimes, and they've done away with that which was foolish. But anyway, they used to call us and say, hey, heads up, we just know that people are coming in for some kind of reunion at Altar Rock, so you people do your thing, right? And we would get the intercessors together and we'd
Nice.
pray against it. And we've been out there a number of times. But anyway, so I took Paul out there, and we were just driving along in my truck talking, and all of a sudden he just pinned himself against the seat in the door and said, oh, we need to turn around. We need to get out of here. And I said, well, why would you say that, Paul? And he said, this is a bad place. Well, the rest, no one else would know it was a bad place. We were just driving down a highway. Yeah. And you couldn't even see the graveyard. It's back behind a orchard. But anyway, I said, why would you say that? And he said, because he says there are really powerful spirits that are here and there. And he said there's usually one in every city I go through. And he said they're like 40, 50 feet tall. They're no joke. I call them, what do you call them? The old ones or something. But anyway, he said, once in a while, I'll see two of them talking together in a large metropolitan area. But he said, there are over 50 of them here. And he said, they're having like a general's convention here. And he said, besides that, they're looking at us right now and talking. And I said, well, I'm just going to go ahead. There's the highway is called Pass Road, and it goes right in front of Altar Rock. So I'm just going to go ahead and go down the highway here. He says, no, please don't. I said, well, would you like me to let you out? I'd be willing to let you out if you want to. He says, oh, you can't let me out? Not here. I said, okay, well, just hold on to your butt here. Well, I'm going to go through past. I said, if it helps you, Paul, I do this a lot. This is my prayer drive. So we're going to be okay. But just buckle in and get ready for it. So anyway, he was begging me not to go because he could see these big beings. And we went through, and he said, oh, please stop, please. One of them flew down and standing in the road. And so I was just, I go through there all the time and pray, but I was getting the whole thing narrated by him, Yeah. So I said, okay, can you hear what he's saying? He says, yeah, he's saying he's not going to let us pass. I said, well, I seriously doubt that, since I pass here all the time. And I said, you do believe in the power of Christ, right, Paul? And he said, yeah, but I don't think we should provoke these old generals. And I said, I provoke them all the time. That's why they're looking at us. And so I said, this is what I'm going to do. I drove up to where he said it was about 50 feet in front of us and about 50 feet tall. And I said, okay, I'm going to start praying against him, and I want you to tell me everything he says and does. And so I just began to pray against the demon prince or the principality. Again, they're not demons themselves, but they are over vast numbers of demons. And so that's why they call him a demon prince. But anyway, as I began to pray against that demon prince, he began to shrink. And when he shrank down to about 20 feet or under, he began to ask the other ones, please come help me. I can't leave. They said, we told you not to go down there, and you went down there on your own, and now you're going to have to face that on your own. We're not going to come down there. And this man could hear this conversation going on. And so that was encouraging him, because the big group didn't want any part of it. And the rebellious one that thought he was all that in a bag of chips had come to stand in the road to impede our progress. These kind of things happen all the time in the unseen realm.
Uh-huh.
And people say things like, man, I really had a hard day or whatever. But they don't understand the pervasive reality of spiritual warfare. It's all around us every day. And so this thing kept shrinking, and it was telling the others he couldn't move, which I hadn't said anything about him moving one way or the other. I just began to rebuke him. But God saw fit to let this man see this whole thing play out and me to hear about it, which I really appreciated. And, Paul was giving me a blow by blow. He said, he's crying now. He's begging you, please let me go. I shouldn't have come down here. Please let me go back. And he went from making petitions to actually crying. He said he's crying now. He's crying tears. He's begging to be released. And he keeps getting smaller and smaller. And he's begging them to help. He's begging you to quit. He's asking for forgiveness for coming down onto the road. But in any event, I just kept rebuking him, and he disappeared completely. So again, I know what I know, and I don't know what I don't know. I don't know if there's like a Principality restart charging station where he can go right and get
spawn point.
Yeah, where he can recover from the effect of my prayers. I don't know, or if he just remains this tall for the rest of. I have no idea. All I know is what happened is he got so small. He said, I don't know if he's too small to see, or if he actually disappeared, but it's not a problem anymore. Well, then of course. This man was totally jazzed because he got to see and hear the whole thing. Uh-huh. And so we drove back. We were just getting ready for an Isaiah 61 conference, which is why you came down to the church. We drove back to my office, and I said, hey, listen, I've got a few details I have to take care of before the conference starts. And so, I said, you can just hang around, do whatever you want, but I need to be alone here for a while. So I went into my office and I was getting some things in order. And outside on the grass, I heard Paul say, he says, I adjure thee, Satan, come unto me. I thought, what the heck is he doing? And so I jumped up and I ran out there. He's standing on the grass like this. And I said, excuse me. Did I just hear you adjure Satan to come unto you? He says, yeah. And I said, don't do that on our property. He says, why not? I said, because I don't want Satan on our property. And he said, well, he was, I think I told you this, he was the executive vice president of Standard Oil. So he was a big time player and a multimillionaire. And he said, well, he said, I learned as a young man, never deal with the underlings. I just walk into a place and say, who's your boss? And when he comes in, I say, who's your boss? And when he comes in, and I do that until the guy says, nobody's my boss. I own the company. Then I deal with him. And I said, okay. And he said, so I was trying, this is a true story. Yeah, so I was going to just shrink Satan. He saw what happened to that demon prince. He said, I was just going to shrink Satan. I said, well, if that's if all there was to spiritual warfare, I'm sure someone would have already shrunk Satan. Maybe Jesus when he was here. But anyway, I said, that's not how it works. And since that's not how it works, don't conjure any demons to come onto this property. We deal with demons, and we deal with principalities, and we deal with all the things we need to deal with, because we're trying to set people free. We're not just conjure them for the fun of it to try to shrink anybody.
Yeah.
And that's what he kept calling it, shrinking. I was just going to shrink him like you did that prince. But anyway, now the question that a lot of people ask when I tell that story is, what about all those other demon princes? And I don't know about all those other demon princes. We already knew that Altar Rock was a high place, and it was very, very dark. And we went up there and we poured out wine, water, and oil, and rebuked them all and served them notice that Altar Rock was now under the domain of Jesus Christ and his sons and daughters. And that's another story. I don't know if you have time for it or want that, but the point is, if you begin to do spiritual warfare for ulterior purposes, to do something cool or to be the guy that bound Satan or something, I think you're in for danger. I think that Scripture tells us to fight because there are souls at stake. We fight for human souls. We fight for houses to be cleansed and for people to be freed from dominion and for powers of disease to be broken. We don't fight, excuse my saying, but just for the hell of it, right? Like conjuring demons. No Christian ever should conjure demons, and I have heard of other people doing it. I've heard of them trying to do that in exorcism. Let's conjure the demon, then try to bind it. Like, to me, that is just not the way to go about things. We fight the battles that God puts in front of us, and we fight them the way God tells us to fight them. But there is no hint ever that anybody should conjure a demon. Demons can be conjured. That's what seances are all about. But there's no indication in God's word that we should participate in anything like that. So anyway, that's a story about principalities. Now, Balkai, the dragon of this area, resides out there in the Buttes, and so that's another story. I've got a lot of stories, so just if you want to go on to another question.
Yeah, before we go on for another story, we love stories. We could definitely do some more stories. Maybe we should just touch on a little bit on some rules of engagement for people, since you brought that up.
Yeah.
I know that we had an experience back when we were in Reading. I don't remember what brought this up.
I think it was when we heard Romaine.
John Ramirez?
Yes.
He had a story. Something
and then you had told even the story about David Hogan on the
well, we hadn't heard that at that point.
But we didn't hear it at that point.
Right.
But same
but
kind of thing.
For whatever reasons, I don't remember exactly. You started marking high places in the area. I remember interceding in our apartment one night, and
because we were out in California too, by.
We knew there's like witchcraft and stuff up in the area.
We were close enough to Shasta that we could visit.
Yeah. But I remember
if you get close to Shasta, come visit us.
Yes.
Yeah.
We only live a few hours south.
Yeah,
yes.
We will definitely come visit you guys.
It was when we were living there, just a reference. But yeah,
all right.
But
yes, we would love to come visit you.
Yeah.
But while we were there, I remember interceding in our apartment, and at some point I challenged whatever local principalities or stuff were there. It was like, we're coming. I don't remember what I said, but it was like, we're coming for you. Well, not too long after that, we had some unfortunate visitors in the night and some creepy stuff that happened. Fortunately, God was merciful. It wasn't too bad. But we had to pray and deal with that and not do that again. So I'm curious, in terms of, I'd love to hear from you some more about what are the rules of engagement and how we make sure we're staying submitted to the authority of Christ and stay in our lane, as it were, while challenging those powers and
I mean,
dominions, etc.
also the verse came up that I thought of was is like in Ephesians, it talks about standing and keep on standing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And to me, that's like taking ground and staying in it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, we could talk about the standing, keep on standing. It's very important. Let me talk about rules of engagement.
Yeah.
Because there is a book written by a wonderful prophetic guy named John Paul Jackson. I don't know if you guys do John Paul Jackson, but
I've heard of them.
he wrote a book called Needless Casualties of War. I don't generally bring it up for one reason. Most Christians are too timid, not too bullish on spiritual warfare. So needless casualties of war will cause a lot of people to push back from any warfare at all. And we're called to be good soldiers of Jesus Christ. So that's why I don't bring it up. However, in this conversation, I want to bring it up because he brings up some rules of engagement, and it's important for us to understand that we are only covered by the grace of God when we are doing what Jesus has asked us to do. And he tells us to cast out demons. That's what we're supposed to do. Now, in doing that, we will be indirectly fighting against principalities. We will be directly fighting against the cosmic creators, the controllers of government systems is actually what that means. And we will be fighting against the spirits of malicious plots. And so while that's all true, the way you defeat a general is to defeat all of his soldiers. Most generals aren't out in front of their men saying charge. You know, they're in the back saying let's send divisions there and divisions there, and the story of Johann Blumhardt in Mottligen, Germany, is a significant story of defeating a principality. And that happened through a girl named Gottlieben. That word, I don't know if that's the exact pronunciation, but anyway, it's the German word that means lover of God. And she was raised by her aunt, who was a witch, and she was demonized to the hair roots. And through her deliverance, the city or the small town, the burg of Mottligen, was delivered from the dominion of a principality. And there are several accounts of it, and some from Gottlieb and some from Johann Blumhardt. And the one that I think is the most profound is that this demon prince actually spoke through Gottlieben to Johann Blumhardt just before he was completely defeated. And he said, "Oh, praying man, I hate you, I hate you, I hate you. I would destroy you in a moment, but I'm not able to touch you." And when Johann Blumhardt said, "Who are you and why are you in Gottlieben?" He said, "I am the prince that has ruled over this area. And I built my throne over many, many decades. And you, by your prayers, have torn it down completely." That was really significant to me. And then Johann Blumhardt said, "Well, if I've torn down your throne, why don't you go?" And his answer was, "It's too embarrassing to be defeated by a mere mortal." He said, I eventually will go when the hosts of heaven arrive, because I know they're coming. And when they arrive, I can at least say, yes, I left my throne. I could do no other, for the hosts of heaven arrived. But it's been 150 years ago. It's amazing confessional of a demon prince that was giving us a bird's eye view into what it looked like when 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 sons and daughters of God worked in conjunction with the Spirit of God to destroy a demonic stronghold that got weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And if you will read about what happened in Germany, is that when that demon prince, when the hosts of heaven arrived and that prince gave up his what was left of his throne and left, all of the demons in that little town left with him. And people were, it was a sensational moment of deliverance to the town. People who were sick got healed. People who were depressed, the spirits of heaviness left them. It's like everything bad was whisked out of the town in one fell swoop. And I've only heard of that in a couple of places. I heard in the Hebrides revival that happened. I heard in the years ago in the Indonesian revival, it happened in certain places. But that's what we're praying for here, is for the thrones of darkness to be destroyed to the point that there's no throne for the prince to rule from. And he is ushered out of the area by the forces of heaven when they come in, and they come in answer to our prayers. Again, not that we're praying, oh, forces of heaven come in, forces of heaven come in, forces of heaven come in, but when we're doing spiritual warfare, that's what we're doing. The word for cast out is ekbalo. It's to push out, to force out. And as we're forcing out evil, then the good comes flooding in. And so anyway, that's a remarkable story of how that happened in history 150 years ago in a little place called Mottligen, Germany. But it's the story of Johann Blumhardt. And you know what the church did with that? They said, go to Mottligen, you'll be healed, you'll be set free, but don't listen to him because he's crazy. You know, that's what religion does to bona fide revivals, right? Like he's got all this stuff going on, but we just don't want to believe about the spiritual warfare. And that's why he wrote a little book called Blumhardt's Battle. And he said, hey, what happened here was not coincidental. We fought for this little girl's life, and we fought the forces of hell, and we tore down the stronghold of iniquity in this area, and heaven opened. And so anyway, that's a book that, if you're interested, you probably should read it. It's in English now. It's called Blumhardt's Battle.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
You're right.
And the other one was needless casualties of war or unnecessary
Yes.
casualties of war.
Yeah.
Okay,
Awesome.
Yeah.
gotcha.
Yeah, it also reminds me of John 5, where the man gets healed of all those demons of the legion, and then the whole entire town comes to Jesus the next time they visit to want to get healed of all their things. And yeah.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yes.
Something
Go to
you
where the
said-
help is.
Something
Yeah.
you said in that story, and then also when you mentioned about, I know it's partially speculative, partially just what the word says, but we don't know, but Satan taking a third of the stars. What you said about the underlings coming with them, and with the principality underlings going with him.
Yeah.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I think that's a really profound statement that illustrates the power and importance of leadership, whether at
Yeah.
the national level or in a ministry or a business or in your
Yep.
home.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
there's
Right.
there's spiritual authority that comes with that, and a strong
Right.
influence as well.
There's another term that you will hear in ancient literature called egregore. I don't know if you've heard of that term, an egregore. But what it implies is the ruling spirit that has gained its authority through the submission of the people. And so it is a reflection of the evil things that are being done there. That's what empowers the egregore. I personally think that an egregore is another look at what a principality is. But I do think they gain their power from the cumulative sins that are happening in that area. And they're directly connected. And so if you want to defeat the prince or the egregore, you begin winning souls to Christ and overturning the evil. And now instead of injustice, there's justice. And instead of impurity, there's purity. And everything that we do to bring the kingdom of God into the hearts and souls of men weakens the egregore and eventually can displace him completely. And, Christ can be Lord of a city, not just of a human heart. And so that's a beautiful thought, isn't it?
Yes, it is. How that ties perfectly. It's one of our questions for you. What is the effect or the influence of personal holiness and consecration, as well as corporate for congregation or city, etc., on spiritual warfare, on dealing with these powers of the heavenly places?
Well, it's huge. Evil spirits feed on sin, on evil. Anything that is repulsive to God empowers evil spirits, and so they come to sin like fowl come to roadkill, right? And so there's always a reason that evil resides where it does. It reminds me of another book. So George Otis Jr. Wrote a book, and I'm trying to think of the title, but the subtitle is Why Evil Resides Where It Does. And it's a very interesting book. And what he has done is he has gone and studied the history of places. Yuba City is one of them, by the way. It's in the book. He studies why evil resides where it does, and there's always a reason. It's never without cause. Remember, the Bible says that the Lord said to Cain, "Your brother's righteous blood cries to me from the earth where it was spilled." And that's a real thing. And so when people are slain, their blood calls out for vengeance. And sometimes their voices do. The killing fields in Cambodia. I don't know if you've read the book, The Killing Fields, or saw the movie, The Killing Fields, but Cambodia was the site of millions of axe murders. They killed 3 million people with clubs and axes and machetes, and they threw their dead bodies into the rice paddies, which became known as killing fields. And it was one of the most intense sheddings of innocent blood in world history under Pol Pot in Cambodia. But anyway, we have done missions work in Cambodia, and you can buy a killing field for a fraction of the price that you could buy any other rice paddy, because the people in Cambodia, many of them their third eye remains open from their youth. They can see spirits, they can hear spirits, and and the spirits of the wandering dead that were slaughtered are crying out for justice. And because they can hear those voices, they don't want anything to do with the killing field.
Whoa.
So we have bought those killing fields and prayed around them until all the voices are silent and built orphanages on them.
That's awesome.
That's a way of redeeming the land, right? But my point is simply that evil resides where it happens until it is dealt with.
Yeah. I have to interject. This is a little bit of a detour, but you mentioned something about this before, and now that's kind of a big deal. You mentioned the idea of the unquiet dead in our last podcast episode. You just kind of tossed it in there. I was like, well, that sounds interesting, but I don't know if we have time to chase it. But that's a really big story, and there's a lot of, I don't know if it's contention, but definitely different opinions, some very strong ones about, ghosts versus demons and whatever else. Personally, I've always thought, like, oh, if it's a ghost, it's a demon, like pretending to be somebody else. But this idea of the unquiet dead or this stuff, and I know about the land being defiled and some topics around that, but can you explain?
Yeah, can someone be...
Because everything we've seen, or everything I've seen or heard in scripture or in people's personal testimonies, or their near-death experience or whatever, or I should say most everything that I've seen or heard, it seems like when you die, either you're in heaven with God or you're in hell. So what is this that we're talking about here?
Yeah.
Okay, so before I answer that, the title that I was trying to think of is The Twilight Labyrinth.
Oh,
That's the book by George Otis Jr., The Twilight Labyrinth.
okay.
Why evil resides where it does. And that's a very interesting read. Now, in answer to your question,
That's not the title.
most of what we understand in the West as doctrine doesn't come from the Bible. It comes from theologians that have a really big column that I call SMU. That's stuff made up, not in the Bible. They just made that up. And it becomes part of what Jesus called vain traditions handed down from the elders. Now, in America, the father of theology is St. Augustine. And Augustinian theology is the platform on which all the Bible colleges and the seminaries in the West are built. And Augustine had a wonderful conversion and some great quotes. You can find some great quotes from him. But remember that in his day, it was illegal. That's different than not recommended. It was illegal to disagree with him. And because he was a bishop. And of course, if you were a woman, it was illegal to have any question at all about theology. It's like, this is none of your business, which was really sad, dark days, right? And so he just made a lot of stuff up. And I'm not trying to be mean-spirited toward him. I'm just saying that much of Augustinian theology is not in the Bible. He, for one, believed in pervasive, meticulous divine control, if you want a theological phrase for it. But what that means is that God controls all details of everything, everywhere, all the time. There's a real problem in believing that.
Yeah.
Because if you believe that God controls all the details, then there's no such thing as human will. The very nature of human will gives us the right to do something against the will of God, which you'll never meet a person that hasn't done that. That's why we know we're sinners. We've all chosen to do things that we knew was not pleasing to the Lord. And he could have, obviously, he could have made us not do that, but that would have taken away our free will. So at the very root of the human condition is free moral agency. We get to choose for good or for bad, even when it hurts us and when it hurts others. But Augustine didn't believe in that. And if you follow that path far enough, it gets crazier and crazier. So Augustine actually said, therefore, there is no such thing as evil, because how could there be evil when God transposes all things according to his wish, and God is good all the time. So anyway, in that setting, you can make up a lot of things. You actually have to make up a lot of things, because it doesn't make sense that everything that happens is good. You can take the story of, during the Third Reich, I can't remember the little girl's name, but there's a true story of SS officer that came and kidnapped a little girl and came back with that little girl's eyes glazed on his keychain, and used that to terrorize the mother and father. And it's the worst kind of evil. But again, Augustinian theology would say that God is the one that caused that to happen, because he controls all things. And so if that's God, then God isn't good, right? Yeah. And we know that's not true. God is good. His will is good, is perfect. He allowed free moral agency of men and angels. That's the only way you can get a cosmic revolt, is angels and all created beings that have satience, that can think and choose. They can decide whether they want to submit to God or they want to rebel against him. And that doesn't mean God is impotent. It means that, just like, I don't know if you have any children, but my children have done many things that I didn't want them to do, but I let them do to learn their lesson. And that's part of free moral agency. Dad says, don't do that, because it'll hurt you or you'll hurt somebody else. And then you go do it. And then it's like, see, that's not a good way to live life. But anyway, of course, our lives are filled with that. We know that God allows us choices, and then the Holy Spirit convicts us of, that wasn't a good choice. That was not profitable. But anyway, out of that quagmire, we have a ton of religious traditions that they come back to arbitrary decisions that Augustine made. They don't come back to the Bible. I'll give you a few of them. Necromancy is not speaking to the spirits of the dead. It's speaking to the spirits of the damned. That's different. If necromancy was speaking to the spirits of those that we say are dead, then Samuel was a necromancer. The whole story of the witch of Endor, the spirit of Samuel came up. And though the witch was a necromancer, she certainly wasn't trying to get a hold of the spirits of the righteous. She dealt in the spirits of the damned, which is why Saul went to her there. But for those that say, we know that it was necromancy because there was a necromancer. Let's take the Mount of Transfiguration. Was Jesus a necromancer? He spoke with Moses and Elijah, and they were talking to him about his death and the things that were to come. And he went out of his way to take Peter, James, and John up there to show them that before his crucifixion, because he wanted them to know that we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses. And that word surrounded, by the way, has nothing to do with them being in paradise and looking down on us. There's the whole doctrine of men in white. I don't know if you followed that, but the Bible talks about angels and the Bible talks about men in white. And it specifically says men in white. And they're supernatural men in white. And they're distinguished as different from messenger angels. But anyway, so if you take some of these things back, you'll find out that we're surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses that are witnesses together in the things that we're going through. And without them, we won't complete what God's called us to complete. And without us, they don't get conclusion to the things that they were involved in. And many people see them. What happens in religious circles is somebody tries to convince them they're a demon. And then good people filled with the Holy Spirit say, I know it wasn't a demon. It was my mother. And she gave me good advice. By the way, I don't know if you know about the story of J.B. Phillips. He was a friend of C.S. Lewis's. And so J.R. Tolkien, C.S. Lewis, J.B. Phillips, who wrote Phillips' translation of the Bible, they were all friends, and they were in the London Writers Guild together. And J.B. Phillips died early, and they were really sad. And so this is in one of C.S. Lewis's autobiographies of his own life. And he says that he was really depressed because J.B. Phillips had died, and he was praying about it and sad, and he was trying to figure out something. And he never does tell you what he was trying to figure out. But he was praying that God would give him an answer to some pressing question. And suddenly he says, there's J.B. Phillips standing in my room, looking much better than he ever had in his life. And it startled him. And he basically said, hey, what are you doing here? You're supposed to be dead. J.B. Phillips said, Brother Lewis, they were English Brits, brother Lewis. He says, you know better than that. We who belong to Christ never die. We just go into the eternal dimension, which the Bible is very clear about, right? So he then basically says, well, do they know you're out of heaven? You sneak out a window? How'd you come back here, right? And he said, what a silly question. The Father allowed me to come back to you because you're my good friend. And I'm here to give you the answer to your prayer. So he told him what to do and what not to do and disappeared. So C.S. Lewis, being like hundreds of thousands of Christians, got to thinking, I don't know if that's okay. Maybe I've lost my mind because of the grief. And so he discounted it and he went back to praying for the answer that God had already given him. And so he's praying. This time he's in his bedroom. If I remember right, it was an upstairs bedroom, and he's by the foot of his bed, and all of a sudden he feels somebody set down on the bed, and he looks up, and it's J.B. Phillips. He says, "Oh, Brother Phillips, it's you again." He said, "What are you doing here?" He says, "You know what I'm doing here. You asked God to give you an answer. He sent me back because we're good friends. I told you what to do, and you keep praying and asking God to send you an answer." He says, "No, just do what I told you to do because I'm not going to be coming back again." So he disappears. And J.B. Phillips says, "Yep, I've lost my mind." So anyway, he doesn't have a column for this to fit in, which Christians get into that problem a lot. But anyway, so he's thinking, I don't think that can happen. So he goes to his pastor, whose name I can't remember. But anyway, he must have been a great pastor because he had some legends going to his church, and he sure gave him good advice. But he says, "Hey, pastor, is it possible for the righteous to come back from heaven and to visit the living?" And the pastor wisely said, "Of course it's possible. The Bible says all things are possible, and God can do whatever he wants." And he said, "Why would you ask me that?" And he said, "Well, I keep thinking that J.B. Phillips is showing up in my house." And he said, what does he say? He said, "Well, he gives me the answer to my prayer." And the wise pastor said, you know the Bible better than that. If you ask for a fish, God doesn't give you a snake. And if it's your loving friend that came back from heaven, of course God could do that. Just do what he told you to do." So in his book, he says, looking back over my life, if I had made the other decision, it would have been disastrous. But I did what J.B. Phillips told me to do, and it worked out splendidly. So that's a case of men in white. Of course, when J.B. Phillips is described, he was wearing a glowing robe, right? It's the robe of the righteous.
Yeah.
And those kind of experiences has been all through human history, and they're in the Bible. But because we always just say, "Oh, we don't know what that is, therefore it was an angel." The Bible plainly says it was a man in white raiment that came and did certain things, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, so my dad was a church planter for the Assembly of God. And so if you're reared in any religious system, you got a lot of stuff to unlearn. That is stuff made up, that somebody at some point that was respected said, "This is what I think," and everybody said, "Therefore it must be true."
Mm-hmm.
Even though the Bible says we all know in part and we all prophesy in part, we tend to take the vain traditions handed down from the elders, and we monumentalize them and say, therefore, because he thought this was right, it's always right. And so there's a lot of things, like the Christians traditionally don't want anything to do with the New Age. And, it's commonly referred to as the millennial age. That's what everybody's seeking, as a new age wherein dwells only righteousness, right? I mean, if anybody ought to be praying for the new age, the age of the heavenly water bearer to get here, it should be us, right? New heaven, new earth, that wherein dwell only righteousness. But people are so worried about it. They do things like, we had a lady that came in out of the New Age, really sweet lady, gave her life to Jesus. She was part of the church. And one of our ushers saw her leaving the church weeping one night. And he just because he's a good man, he just said, sweetheart, is everything all right? And she said, no, somebody just told me I wasn't a Christian because I carry a crystal in my purse. And he said, I don't think Pastor Dave would agree with that at all. I think you should go in and talk to Pastor Dave. And so she did. She came back and she said, am I not a Christian if I have this crystal? I said, let me ask you something. Who do you think made crystal? She said, well, it's natural. I said, there's no such thing as natural. Who made crystal? She said, well, God. I said, there you go. So God made crystal, and it has some unique properties, which is why it's in your cell phone, and it's in every TV that's made these days. It's in every camera that's made these days. It has some unique properties, but it was made by God. And furthermore, there's a whole flippin' crystal sea in front of the throne. So there's that. If you don't like crystals, you don't want to go to heaven and be anywhere near the throne. And yet somebody had decided that because crystals can be used in conjurings, like with a crystal ball or something, that crystal is always evil. And those are things that are very easy for religious minds to grab a hold of and make a whole SMU doctrine, stuff made up. You know, all crystals are bad, all triangles are bad, all, you know, if you speak to a loved one that's gone on, you're a necromancer. All spirits instantly go either into heaven or hell. There's not a single verse in the Bible that says that.
Pastor Dave, with that thought in mind, I just want to make sure I close this, because I have this question, I'm sure somebody else will too. If you differentiated the spirits of the dead from the spirits of the damned,
yeah,
you gave examples of the spirits of the righteous, which there's a framework for that, at least with the Catholic and Orthodox traditions, because we're still alive in Christ. What about the spirits of those who, say, with Cambodia, the killing fields? If they didn't know Christ, would they then not be damned? Or what? Like, I don't know. Just how do you parse that? How do you understand?
Well, okay. So that's a really good question that all of Christianity needs to ask itself. Would you say it was just if a God sent into eternal torment someone who had never heard the plan of salvation? Would that be just? Of course it wouldn't. None of us would do that. Sentence people to damnation for not doing something that they never knew about, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, that's extremely biased and ruthless. And so there's a reason. There are two judgments, which I know you know. There's the judgment seat of Christ, which really it would be better. It would be better titled "The Awards Banquet of Heaven," because people are being rewarded for what they did in their lives on the earth, and there's greater rewards for greater righteousness. So again, everybody gets eternal life as a free gift, but there are people that go into eternity as if having passed through a fire and lost everything. That's a direct quote out of the Bible. There are other people that have great reward. So the judgment seat of Christ is a rewards banquet for the righteous. And that's why Paul said that he was, doing everything he could to please Christ and do right in his life, so that he would have, he called it, an abundant entry into eternity. All right. So then there is the great white throne judgment. What is that about? It's either a judgment or it's a farce. I mean, the wicked have already been in hell, so does it make any sense to bring them out of hell and say, "Yeah, I was right about you, sending you back"? It's a ridiculous thought. But if God is actually a righteous and loving judge, and he actually judges people according to the deeds done in the flesh, and that includes millions of people who never heard the name of Jesus, have no idea what that's about. And they lived life as best they could. Many of them are compassionate, kind people because they have the witness of God in their heart, right? It's the light that lights every man that comes into the world. We even, the word conscious means to act with knowledge of right and wrong. And so there are millions of people who have followed that as best they could. And it's those people that will stand before him and will be sheep and goats and will be parted out according to their lives. And, you know, there are millions of people who have rejected Christianity just because of the Augustinian doctrine that only those who heard the gospel, received it, and acted on it will go to heaven. And everybody else is tormented forever. And what happens, because we're made in the image and likeness of God, something deep in our soul says that can't be right. They're being punished. You're the one that decided where they would be born and when they would be born. And they're being punished for not having done something they never had a chance to do. Nothing about that makes sense. And so much of the world has said, I throw out the whole Christian argument based on the injustice of a God that would do that. But again, that is the confusion of Augustinian doctrine. And he got some things right. I'm not trying to put egg on his face. I'm just saying that that God always makes sense in every age. And God will at no point ever be harsher, meaner, spirited, less loving, less redemptive than us. I mean, you know, he's much more loving than we will ever be. And so anyway, I've found, guys, that there's a lot of those kind of things. And you know what I've learned to do is, if my conscience, remember that means to act with knowledge of right and wrong. If my conscience hears a doctrine and I think, that doesn't sound right. That doesn't sound loving, or does it sound kind, or it just doesn't match the character and nature of God, then I've learned to go back and find out why we're believing that. And what I found out is generally we're believing it because somebody a long time ago believed it, never could prove it, just said, you know, it's against the law to disagree with me, and I think this is true. And by the way, you could be put to death by saying it wasn't true. So, you know, a lot of people just, whatever, go along with that. Yeah. So anyway, we have to really dig ourselves out of this big fat column of stuff made up. And one of them, like I started talking about the New Age, but, you know, crystals, there's a crystal sea, and it's on the breastplate of the high priest. And yes, it has some amazing qualities. And yes, anything that can be used, anything can be used for good or for evil. If you can use it, you can use it for good or for evil. And so we need to sort those kind of things through. But when you think about it, here's another book for your book list.
Yes.
I'll take it.
Let's see. I got all these books. What's it called? It's called Principalities and Powers by John Warnock Montgomery. There are a number of books that are called Principalities and Powers, but you want the one by John Warnock, Warnick is his middle name, Montgomery. That guy was brilliant. And that book, that will tie your mind in knots. And you'll just think, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. He makes this argument, for instance. If alchemy, which actually the ancient word means divine change, we should probably start with that. But if alchemy is sinful, which many people think it is, then Jesus is sinful for turning water into wine, which by definition is alchemy. You can look up any dictionary. By definition, turning water into wine is alchemy. And that was Jesus' first miracle. So maybe we need to redefine the way we look at some of these things and not just depend on the stuff made up category. And if necromancy is speaking to those that have gone into the other life, then Jesus is a necromancer because of what happened on the Mount of Transfiguration. For that matter, the first temptation of Christ was a temptation toward toward alchemy, because Satan said, I know who you are, and I know you can turn these stones into bread. And Jesus didn't deny that. He just didn't do it.
Yeah.
But anyway, that book will really expand your brain. And I found it supernaturally. It was totally bizarre. But anyway, I thank God for those kind of supernatural events, because it really opened my eyes and helped me with some of these things. But if you study the spirits of the dead, every culture in human history has had traditions of the unquiet dead and of demons, not as the same, but they've had traditions of both of them. And some hauntings are demons, and some hauntings are the unquiet dead, that something has happened in, like, The Fifth Sense picks up on this, the movie The Fifth Sense. But, I see dead people, and they're wandering around, and they're, again, what I know, what I don't know, I don't know. I don't know all the details that cause them to be in a state in between. I know that millions of people over thousands of years can't all be wrong about that. And there are such a thing as the unquiet dead. And of course, there are people who their claim to fame, because they're seers, is meeting with the spirits of the unquiet dead, finding out why they're there and remedying things so that they can go into eternity. And in most cases, they're there because something dastardly has happened there, and it was covered up, it was hidden, the truth hasn't been found out, and they're tied to that spot until somebody is able to say, no, that's not what happened. The neighbor killed her or whatever. And when that happens, a lot of times people, these spirits, they go into eternity. Now, where do they go? They would go to paradise. Paradise is the place where people go before everything is sorted out, right? There is such a thing as the great white throne judgment, but because God is perfectly just and loving and compassionate, beyond what any of us would ever be, he would never send somebody to a place to suffer for thousands of years before they sorted out that they were actually innocent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I was sort of saying.
If they're going to be sheep at the great white throne judgment, they're not being punished for hundreds of years. Nothing about that makes sense. Actually, you'll find out that everything that really doesn't make sense is in the SMU column. You'll just say, that just doesn't make sense. It's because It was never meant to make sense. It was just made up.
Gotcha.
Oh, yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question, just because I want to
Yeah.
make sure there's no confusion? And what you said about Jesus and alchemy, from what I understand, some of the Gnostics in the early years of the church tried to make the claim that Jesus did his miracles by alchemy that he learned from the Egyptians, like magic.
Yeah,
I don't
that's a
think that's
common
what you're
thought.
saying, but can you just say what you mean by that? Or if you can clarify what you mean by that?
Well, all I meant by that is simply if you take the definition of alchemy,
Mm-hmm.
which is divine change, if you take that definition out of any science book, and then you look at the first miracle of Christ, he turned a non-precious substance into a precious substance,
Right.
water into wine. So any alchemist would say that's alchemy. Now, how did he do that? He did that because he's God.
Right.
He's the one that spoke everything out of nothing, right?
Right.
Creation
Absolutely.
ex nihilo. That's the right of God, only God. And so I'm not saying that it was an Egyptian trick. I'm just saying
Right.
that he made a non-precious substance into a precious substance. And you and I both know he could have made stones into gold. He could do whatever he wanted. The real question that I think you're getting at that needs to be said is it wasn't an Egyptian trick of some kind. It was the power of the Creator God.
Right.
And you know, so I don't. Jesus Christ didn't need any Egyptian magic to walk on the water or to make blind eyes see. And I know there's a whole thought group that says he was just a really clever magician. I'm certainly not in that. I know him to be the Son of God, the Savior, and the Eternal One. And a clever Egyptian sorcerer would not command attention by demons. I've cast out demons in many nations, many languages, in the name of Jesus Christ, the Son of God. So that's not Egyptian sorcery. That is the omnipotent one. And so my case is just that we make all these things taboo, and it's not fair to do that.
Yeah.
Christianity, the religion, which I don't like the idea of religion. I think relationship is what it's all about. But religion gets ugly in a hurry. And religion has a million reasons to discredit anybody that disagrees with them. Yeah. And I would rather, you know, if you and I disagree about something, I'd rather say, hadn't thought of that. You might be right. Yeah. Right?
Right.
I haven't thought of every little thing, and I certainly don't know every little thing, but I'm smart enough to know nobody else does either.
Yeah.
So, you know, when people act like they do, it's like, you know, you need to get over that. We all know in part and we all prophesy in part. And just be a little more Catholic about it. Just say, well, that's a mystery. You don't know for sure about that.
I think the main thing that you were trying to say, because I could just hear the comments. Oh my goodness.
Well, that's why I asked the question, because I understood what you were saying. I just wanted everybody else to be able to hear you say it.
You said it earlier, is that there's truth. Everything that God created, he created, and Satan manipulated it.
Yes.
So the word, even alchemy, going from one thing to another, is a truth. It's just now Satan has manipulated that, and he's manipulated everything.
He's manipulated everything. And so we need to focus on the manipulation, not on the thing that was manipulated. And like you said, what hasn't he manipulated? He's got his claws and everything. Yeah. But anyway, I just
want to say a good lie is a lie that's mixed with truth.
Yeah.
Because then you're confused, and then you easily go into it and look into it more. So so we need to pull apart those truths.
But what happened? What happened to me, guys, is I grew up in a tradition that if they didn't say it, they certainly acted like they knew everything. And as I lived life and saw things that clearly didn't fit in those religious columns, it made me study them out. And I thought, wow, this never was based on the words of Jesus, or right. This never was based on bedrock truth. It was just that so and so said, like old so and so used to say, like grandma used to say, and that may or may not be true. And I think a lot of it, is. I think we need to do that with everything we think we believe. But I think it's particularly foolish when thousands of people of all times have said, we don't understand this, but there are spirits of the unquiet dead. And some of them seem like, little kids and nice people, and just they're there because something horrific happened that hasn't been dealt with. And so I don't pretend to know all that. I just know that can happen. I also know that demons haunt houses. I'm asked, and the church is asked all the time to do house cleansings because there are evil spirits, and they're there with a purpose too. And it may be that the house, we've done house cleansing where in the foundation there was, upside down cross or a pentagram or a Hail Satan logo or whatever. And of course that you get into fetishes, things that are expressly dedicated to evil. And there are all kinds of fetishes. There are external fetishes. A lot of tattoos are external fetishes. And there are internal fetishes, and there are organic fetishes. And, if something has been dedicated to evil, you need to deal with it. Mm-hmm. You can always deal with it. We always say it this way: heaven can always unring hell's bells. It doesn't matter how they did it. We have the greater power.
Yes. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We have my wife put it out to me. What other question I want to?
Because you said it in the beginning, and I just want to make sure.
You had mentioned before, I don't remember if it was in our last interview or if it was in the Isaiah 61 conference.
It was in this, I think.
The idea of the brass heaven over the West, maybe over America in particular. And I have made a little note. I wondered if the fortifications you talked about in the second heaven were part of that. Would you mind explaining what that is and what that means for us? I know it's referenced in Deuteronomy. And
you did talk about like the decisions of individuals. You said it earlier I forget when, but you said it.
So that's a good connection. We're talking about the corporate virtues or vices are reflected in the spiritual climate. So that's what an egregore gains power from, is all the sins of the people. And that's why you can go to certain places like San Francisco, and you just feel unclean. It just feels like it's an immoral city. And you can go to places like in Cambodia. There are places where the killing fields were rampant. There was a lot of bloodshed, and you just feel the spirit of violence. I've been to Vladimir Dracula's torture chamber in Romania, and you could blindfold any spiritual person and lead them onto the property, and they'd say, this place is evil. Well, we know trees aren't evil and rocks aren't evil, but evil is resident in different places, and so is good. And so, Jesus says, if you don't praise me, the rocks and stones will cry out. So the creation of God can reflect good and evil with equal enthusiasm, depending on what has happened in a certain place. So the brass heavens is a term that the prophets used to talk about the climate of unbelief that causes judgment, and that that is just, it's not a person, it's a climate. There has been a lot of doubt, a lot of unbelief, a lot of the rejection of the spiritual. And so there's a climate. Another way to say it may be that the brass heavens is just the condition that exists when there's an egregore of doubt and unbelief present, you know. It's the accumulation of those kind of things. But it is something that is significant to try to deal with. Now, David Hogan is a friend of mine. I think we've talked some about him, but he has as a prerequisite to be what they call an elder. Down there, an elder is over a region, not over a specific church. But to be an elder, you have to have a verifiable resurrection. You have to raise somebody from the dead, that there were witnesses that knew they were dead and saw it happen. And so that is what you call an extra biblical standard. And I told him, I said, wow, I wouldn't even be able to be an elder for you. He said, oh, you would, little brother. He said, if you were down here any time at all, you'd be raising the dead. He said, it happens down here because there is a culture of belief. They believe in miracles. And most of the miracles that people have seen in central Mexico are demonic miracles, but they are indeed supernatural. And so, changing sources is an easy step, right? So if a warlock can heal the sick, and you've seen it happen many times, then for you to believe that Jesus, the Son of God, can heal the sick, it's like, oh yeah, well, that'd be a no-brainer. And so the atmosphere there is pervaded with supernatural realism. And so when the gospel comes, they expect that all the verses in the Bible that we wish were happening in America, they expect them to happen there. And by the way, it's not just Mexico. The first healing of a deaf mute in my life of ministry, I was a young man in Vanuatu, and they brought a girl, and they said, Missy, she's never spoken, and she can't hear, and we think it's evil spirits. Well, I rebuked the evil spirit. It instantly left her, and she began to talk. It was so easy. It happened so quick that I asked the guy I was with, I said, are you sure she's fine? And he said, Missy, it's her mama. Her mama would know if she'd been healed. But I almost was embarrassed, but I was thinking, this is way too easy. But for them, Vanuatu, their national sport is black magic. It's the only country in the world that I know that their national sport is black magic. And they are very proficient in it. And they can do all kinds of wild supernatural spells and curses and all things that are hard to imagine. I'm just going to leave that one alone. Vanuatu is a wild place, man. I've been there 4 times, and it is a unique part of the world. But because of that supernatural realism, when they heard that there was somebody there that had the power of the Creator God, they just thought, "Wow, finally, let's go have the guy heal our daughter," right? Yeah. And it happened instantly. That's the opposite of the brass heavens. That's a environment that's pervaded with belief in the supernatural. And it may not even be belief in Jesus. They may not have heard of him. but they flat believe that supernatural things will probably happen. And so they're wide open to it. And then you have places like, this is another way of stating it in my mind, but it says Jesus did no mighty miracles in Nazareth because of their unbelief. Well,
Right.
that was Almighty God in the flesh. And it can be argued, okay, they aren't believing, so do some miracles and help them believe. That isn't what he was saying. He was saying he wasn't doing miracles because the atmosphere didn't warrant a miracle. That's what Jesus was saying. And, faith is a powerful thing. You must believe to be born again. And so, though he could have done anything, he spoke the world into existence. He did not do that in that environment of doubt and unbelief. And it was rationalistic unbelief. They said, we know who his mother is, we know who his sisters are and his brothers.
Right.
And so how could he possibly be God? And when we're done criticizing him for that, it would be an easy thing to do if you grew up with him, right?
Right.
So anyway, but he still wouldn't honor the unbelief. And then we have the situation where the blind man came out of the city. It's the only situation where Jesus prayed twice for a guy. The first time he prayed for him, he said, I see now, but I see men like trees walking. Jesus prayed again. And then a lot of people overlook this, but that city was a city that Jesus cast the dust off his sandals when he left there because of their unbelief. And he never went back. It's never recorded that he went back. That man was from that city. And Jesus, on his travels, he was passing in front of the city. Jesus usually went into the cities, right? But he had shaken the dust off his sandals. He wasn't going back there because of unbelief. And so he was going in front of the city. The man was brought out of the city. And it goes to the extent of saying a long way out of the city. That's in the verse. But anyway, a long way out of the city. And Jesus healed him. And then he said something that would be odd today, but it's almost unthinkable in those days. He said, don't go back into that city. The dude was a blind man. He'd never seen before. He didn't know anything about life outside of that city. His whole family was in that city. And Jesus said, don't go back into that city. That's amazing, but it speaks to the incredible power of doubt and unbelief. And I think, and this is just me guessing, but I think that accounts for a lot of people who get healings and miracles and then lose them. And the second state of the person is worse than the first. We've had people completely healed of diseases, and they've then a couple of years later, they've got the same disease again. Well, there's something really bad wrong with that. But anyway, it happens sometimes. And anyway, that's another story of brass heaven environment that Jesus wouldn't go back in himself, and he didn't want that man to go back in. Now, if you're living in a brass heaven environment, I'm not saying that you shouldn't live there and you shouldn't pray. Somebody's got to break through the brass heavens, and we came to Yuba Duba Doo. This place was known for evil, and we just said, well, we're going to change it, right? So I believe in that wholeheartedly.
Yeah, that's a sober warning about just about doubt and unbelief and a culture of that in our day. So our follow-up question related to the brass heavens thing, we mentioned earlier about, President Trump has announced that he intends to rededicate our country back to God. For him as a national leader, I can think of examples in the Bible with King David and the effects of what the leader did on the nation.
And regarding to the brass heaven idea.
And regarding to the brass heaven idea, what kind of implications do you think that if that does take place as he intends, what does that
I
do?
think it's huge. I think it's huge. And it doesn't matter how you feel about President Trump. It's, I mean, you could not like his personality, which I would tell anybody. The presidency of the United States is not a personality contest, so get over that. But anyway, but even if you say, oh, I don't think he's, a good Christian or blah, 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 it doesn't matter. When the figurehead of a nation positions himself in submission to God and invites God into the nation, it is absolutely huge. And let me just say this. So what do they call it when a president takes his oath to be the leader of a country? It's called a something ceremony.
Oh. I'm blanking right now. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, no problem. But you'll recognize it. It's called the inauguration ceremony.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. So where did that come from? That comes from the pharaohs. And that comes from the governing spirit. We didn't really spend time on cosmocrators. But anyway, that's one of the things we fight against. And they're controllers of governments. They're very powerful spirits. They're not demons. They like principalities. They have millions of demons that work under them, but they're controllers of governmental systems. Like if you could have your eyes opened, you go down to the UN building in New York, there'd be some cosmocrators over that place. They're controlling the systems of the world. But the so if you go into different cultures, different spirits are called different things. But the cosmocrator, the system controller of the Egyptian government, which was the greatest in the world for a long while, was called the augur. Inauguration. The whole idea was that the ruling spirit would come into the man. The whole idea of what they did with the Pharaoh's sons when he was about to be inaugurated, he would go in and lay before the spirit and allow the spirit to come into him. And if you read the accounts, he would come out as a different man. He had a very powerful spirit in him. But the point is this. The point is that human governments were given to mankind. And so when the leader yields himself to a certain spirit, it has huge influence in the nation by virtue of the fact that the supreme leader yielded to it. And that's what inauguration was always about. And that's why in America, the idea of putting your hand on the Bible and say this nation belongs to the Lord is huge. And so it's not just a thing. It is a really big thing. And it works because he is submitting himself to Christ. You could say, I bet he doesn't read his Bible much. Forget all that stuff. He's the supreme leader, and he's saying, I'm dedicating this nation to Jesus Christ. It's huge, bro.
So cool.
It's huge.
That's wonderful.
It's so big that we're thinking about canceling a wedding and going to be part of it because it is a big deal.
That's awesome.
That is, and this is our 250th year of the nation, right? This year.
Yep. It's a big deal.
A
Yeah.
huge deal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
We should be so thankful for
That's-
our president who consistently um, says things of honor to the Lord. And he's not a perfect man. I get it. But you know what? All the people that did amazing things in the Bible records, they weren't perfect people either. They were just people. And fortunately, they made enough good decisions for God to honor them and use them. But remember, everything on the blue planet has to do with man's compliance. And so when we give assent to evil spirits have, the Bible calls, I think we talked about this some, but I talk a lot about this in Isaiah 61 teachings. But the Bible says, do not give place to the devil. The word place is topos, T-O-P-O-S. It means a license to operate. And you give that through consent. And what the president will be doing is giving consent to the Spirit of the Lord to operate in these United States. It's a huge deal.
That's very exciting.
I'm just thinking about like all the principalities and things that like what that looks like. Like if you're just praying on the road with Paul and you're seeing him shrink,
Yeah.
what in the
Yeah.
world is going to happen?
Yeah.
Sounds like
Like-
government downsizing.
Yeah. Exactly. It's a big deal.
Well, that's epic. I would love to do like a part 2 on cosmic craters at some point here. I don't know, maybe we can set that up. But, to honor your time, you've taken extra time with us, actually. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Would you mind just finishing with that story about the dragon spirit you're talking? We can't touch that.
Yeah, so
not tell that story if we have the time.
Okay, so our region is the region of the 1849 gold rush. It's right here. It wasn't in San Francisco. That's just where the big ships came in from overseas. But the gold was discovered right here. And so the gold rush brought a lot of evil, particularly lust and greed. There was a lot of bloodshed, but anyway, into that great evil, there are people that sold everything they had, and they came from, a lot of them from China. I don't know if you've heard about the Chinese slaves during the gold rush, and they put them to work on the railroad, but they also put them to work as prostitutes, male and female. And so there was a lot of perversion. And so what happened is the few controlled the gold rush and got richer and richer and richer. And the masses became slaves. So they would literally work them to death and bury them in a shallow grave, never think twice about it. Some of the stories of the gold rush, it was the ultimate season of debauchery. And so we're trying to clean up that all these years later. But during those desperate times, Chinese who could not get back home, it's not like you just, drove over to a certain place and could drive back. They were stuck there. Make it or break it, they were stuck there for life. And they could not escape that. They had nowhere to go. And so some of them, they yielded to occult spirits and they began conjuring demons. And when you're here, I'd love you to come, but when you're here, I'll take you to the Bakai portal, and you can see the place on the riverbank that the dragon appeared when it was conjured by the Chinese through blood sacrifice. And they conjured it because they couldn't defeat the power brokers, the white men, with any weapons that they had. except spiritual weapons. So they conjured the dark warrior. That's what Ba-Kai means. And that dark warrior then empowered them to fight back against these settlers and these gold miners. And anyway, the spirit is still here, the spirit that was conjured here, because they gave it legal right to come here. Remember, everything happens in the spirit world through accord. When you have an affinity with the spirit and invite it, your invitation gives it topos. And so they did that. They did that at a sufficient level to cause a huge, powerful spirit, a dragon spirit from China, to come from there over here and establish its nest here. Its lair is in the buttes. That's where all those cosmic craters had gathered at Altar Rock. And so there's an old depiction of this little mountain range. It's the smallest mountain range in the world is here in Yuba City. And it's called the Sutter Buttes, but Altar Rock is the highest point. That's where the blood sacrifices are done. And in the middle of it, there's a valley that is said to be the dragon's lair. And it's government owned, and you can't go there without permission. But anyway, there's an old picture that has been repainted now, and it still has the dragon on it. But the old picture showed the dragon curled around in the inside of the valley, and it's a sizable valley, so it's a big old dragon. We've also had people who are seers that come to the church that had encounters with it. I don't know if you guys know who Terry Bennett is, but he's a friend of ours, wonderful guy. But he's a prophet from Tennessee, and he's just a great guy. But anyway, first time we had him come out here, we didn't tell him about the place. We just invite people out, and they have all kinds of experiences when they get here. But anyway, so Terry was going to come out, and we had advertised it, and he called and he said, "Hey, I'm really sick. I can't come." And I said, "Oh, come on, Terry. We'll pray for you. We'll have the intercessor pray for you. You got to come." And he said, "Well, I had an experience. I'll tell you about it when I get there, but pray for me, and I'll see how it goes." Well, so as it happened, he wound up coming a day late, but he did come. And so when he got here, first thing he said is, he said, "So you didn't tell me about the dragon." And I said, "It sounds like you already met him." And he said, "Oh, I met him." He said, "The thing threatened to kill me." And I said, "Really? Tell me about it." He said, "Well, I was just laying in bed praying for the meetings. And," he said, "this dragon stuck its head into my bedroom, and its snout was as big as the whole room. It was just, I could see it, when you go into the spiritual state, you can see through walls and stuff." He said, "I could see its head and everything outside, but its mouth was just right up at my feet at the bottom of the bed." And he said in a deep, ugly voice, he says, "You dare to challenge me?" And Terry said, "I knew it was from Yuba City. I was praying for Yuba City when it happened." And he said, "I just started praying in my spirit." And he said, "I felt the Spirit of the Lord say, just begin to praise Jesus." And so he didn't talk to it. He didn't say, "Yes, I dare to challenge you." He just began to worship the Lord. And he said it just slowly pulled its head out and left. But he said, I thought I was dying. I was so sick. And so anyway, he said, "I called you and you said, we'll get the intercessors praying." And he said, "My strength came back pretty quick." But he said it was pretty intense. And I knew you would know who the dragon was. So I said, "Yeah, I know who the dragon is." But anyway, we've had a number of experiences with the dragon. Of course, I still run into people that don't believe in territorial spirits, and to me, it's just like, oh, it's amazing to me that people can be experts in something they don't know anything about, you know. But I, for us, territorial spirits are very, very real. And the dragon, Bacchae is one of them. They have a Bacchae festival every year here, and they get a big dragon suit. They, you know, you've seen these Chinese dragon suits where there will be like 30 people in it, and they make it look like it's alive and walking around, you know. But it's a big old dragon suit, and the Buttes is its lair. So when you are here, I'll show you a statement that I wrote out. God was just impressing me to write it out. And it's a statement about the lordship of Christ over this area and over all the land that the Buttes oversee to the north, east, west, and south. And it's a declaration and a decree. So I wrote it out. I put it in plastic to keep it safe from the elements. And then I put it in a tube. And we took 7 people up there to the top of Altar Rock, which is owned by generational Satanists. So you're not supposed to go up there, but we did anyway. And we went up there under the cover of darkness, and we blow the shofars, and we took that statement, and I read it out loud. We poured out wine, water, and oil, and then I sealed it into a PVC, and I dropped it down in a crack that went down in Altar Rock, and it went way down like 50 feet. We could hear it, you know, going, making its way down the shaft. But anyway, so it'll be up there when Jesus comes back. So,
Awesome.
so we left having, you know, we had communion, we had a good time. We declared that facing all 4 directions, and I read the decree, and so we do a lot of deliverance here, as you know. And so we just did that on July 3rd of 1999. And then we had our 4th of July picnic, and then we went on about life. And we didn't notice anything, you know, like there was a lightning storm or anything like that. It was just another day. We went on about life. But that was so significant in the spirit realm that the next week I was praying for a lady, and sometimes spirits will talk out of people during exorcism. And a spirit said, I know you can cast me out, but before I go, I have a message from the prince that rules over the Buttes. Well, you know, we had just been up there and established that Jesus ruled over the Buttes. And so I said, I get my messages direct from the prince that rules over the Buttes. This demon said, not that prince. And I said, well, there's only one prince that rules over the Buttes. So I suppose you have a message from the prince that got dethroned the other day. He said, I have a message from Bacchae the dragon. I said, well, what is that? And he said, if you will go back up there, you don't even have to take the other guys, but if you will go up there and stand where you stood and renounce what you said, the dragon will give you anything your heart could desire. And I said, well, what my heart desires, the dragon cannot give me, not now, not ever. So I said, I'm not going to do that. You just take the message back, not interested. And that happened to me 4 times, different people, different spirits. If you renounce what you said, the dragon will give you anything your heart can desire. And then Jess Parker, who always teaches with me, he's one of the pastors here he heads up deliverance on a daily basis here. And he came rushing down to my office. He said, oh, you'll never believe what happened. I said, let me guess. The demon said it'd give you anything you wanted if you could talk me into going up and renouncing what we said up there. He says, yeah, how did you know? I said, it's happened 4 times.
He's
So
been
anyway,
trying.
so, we slapped high five and said, man, we got their attention. So we kept doing what we're doing. Now, the next week, it happened again. But this time, I said, at your next staff meeting, tell everybody we're not players on making a deal with the dragon. He said, oh, no, this is different. I said, okay, well, what's the message this time? He said, the dragon says, because of your pride in refusing to renounce what you said, there's going to be a blood sacrifice offered against you every day until you renounce that statement. And then it went on to quote scripture from Ezekiel, said, because you have a chance to stop the bloodshed. If you don't, the blood is on your hands. And that happens often with evil spirits. They'll quote, that happened with Jesus, right?
Right.
So anyway, I said, well, that's not going to work either. I'm not interested in any deals with the dragon, and the blood isn't on my hands. It'll be on your hands. And so just tell the dragon we're not players. So anyway, then what happened, that message only came one time. And immediately people started dying all around our property. We have 40 acres. So, it was a guy got hit, laid down in all black in the road and let a truck run over him. Somebody did the same thing with the train that goes right by our property. And then a boy came home from school and honor student at school got a kitchen knife and went next door and stabbed a woman to death. Didn't even remember he did it. All these demonic things were happening, but it was all around our property. And so when we had our pastors meeting, Pastor Lou Benninger, he also ran a ministry called Trauma Intervention Program. So anytime there's a 911 call in our county, they call us and we dispatch somebody to just for soft side comfort and help and encouragement. So anyway, consequently, every time there's a 911 call, we know about it. And so that happened. And Luce at our meeting, he said, something's up. He says, all the 911 calls are adjacent to our property. And I said, well, here's what happened. They're killing people. And so we decided every month we do a 3-day fast. And so it was just coming up that next week. And so I said, we're going to announce this weekend that the 3-day fast next week, we're going to be fasting and praying against the spirit of death. And we're going to pray for the release of the spirit of life in Christ Jesus. And so we didn't tell people everybody's dying all around our property. We just said there have been an inordinate amount of deaths in the area. We found out through the trauma intervention program. And so we're going to pray against the spirit of death, that it would be defeated by the spirit of life in Christ Jesus. So we had a whole bunch of spirit-filled Christians praying for it. And the first night that we were coming together, because when we do a Hungry for God fast, we do a Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, a prayer time at the church during that fast. And so the first night, we were all getting ready to turn into the church property, and there was a head-on collision right by our driveway. And a young lady was, she was a nurse practitioner. She was laying out on the pavement, bleeding out. And Lou Benninger, who heads up the trauma intervention program, was right there when it happened. And of course, he put on his badge and he can go on the other side of police tape. And he went and said, what's going on? And they said, well, we're going to lose her. The guy driving the truck said he just blacked out and didn't remember running into her, but he hit head on her, and she's going to die. And so Lou, this whole line of cars had lined up because of the police tape. And he just went from car to car saying, "Are you from Glad Tidings?" Yeah. Pray for this girl. I can't remember her name right now, but we all began to pray by name for the woman that was dying. And they'd already told Lou there's no way she's going to make it. But God saved her. She did make it. And that event, it broke the power of death in the region for 54 days. No one died. And there was a newspaper article, and it said Yuba City or the Garden of Eden. And it said, we don't know why, but no one has died in this county for 54 days. No SIDS death, no old people, no murders, no suicides. Nobody has died. And of course, we knew why, but nobody would believe us. But that's what happened is the spirit of life in Christ Jesus. When Bacchae was killing people in retribution against us, God just said, not going to let that happen, and jammed a bean up the dragon's nose. So anyway, that's a story of real spiritual warfare and principalities. That's how it works, as demons do the bidding of the prince, and they can manipulate people in all kinds of ways. Lou Benninger knew the guy that was in the truck, and he was crying. He said, "I don't know what happened. I was fine. I looked up and saw a little car, and it was just another day. I was driving home, and next thing I knew, she was on the asphalt dying, and I guess I blacked out." Well, demons can do those kind of things to people who aren't filled with the Spirit of God. So anyway, yeah, we have lots of stories like that, and I tell you a lot of those. We've got them from all over the world. But anyway, yeah, that's so. Oh, let me end by saying this: we have another young lady that is a seer, and she heard me tell about Bacchae and the dragon lair, and she saw that they were training llamas to walk up the paths over into Happy Valley that's government controlled. And so they said, if anybody has ever wanted to see inside of Happy Valley, if you'll help the llama trainer and you'll walk a llama up over the pass, we'll have lunch in Happy Valley, and then we'll walk them back. So she thought, hey, I want to see in there and see if I can see the dragon, right? Because she's a seer. And so she's walking the llamas up over there, and there's about 20 of them. And all of a sudden, they're breaking the top, and the llamas go berserk, and they're all trying to get away from their handlers. And she just put her hand on the llama's neck and said, "You're with me, honey. You're going to be all right." And it just quit being hysterical, and it was just standing there with her. And she went up to the main llama trainer and said, "Hey, I can lead my llama over the pass. Do you want me to take the lead and you can follow?" And the trainer said, "Yeah, please." So she walked up over the pass, and all the llamas fell in line behind her. And when she got there, she saw this huge dragon. And obviously the llamas saw the huge dragon. They were just breaking the top. And the first one says, "No way, I'm sure that thing has llamas for lunch." And they freaked out. A lot of animals can see and smell evil spirits, but they freaked out. But just the presence of a spirit-filled Christian calmed them, and they went over and had lunch. And she said the dragon was curled up, but it had shackles on it, and there were 3 huge angels that were holding it down. And so
That's
that's
awesome.
been a while ago. One of the things I can't do is I can't see. I take everything by faith, and by hearing
Right.
people's stories. So I don't know if the dragon is still there in shackles or whatnot. But I do know that the dragon is we're putting its fire out around here. And
Mm.
That's awesome.
we're trusting God for a complete breakthrough that opens heaven and rights all the wrongs and injustices that were done here. And there's a mighty outpouring of the Spirit of God. So that's my last dragon story for the day.
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's
I want to ask one question. It's a
oh,
super short question. This is my
so you think, yeah.
literal, no, it is. It's
Okay,
this
what
right
is that?
here. It's you
Oh,
because
go ahead.
it's my
Go
one
ahead. Go ahead.
question.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
So if everything has an element of truth,
Just jump to it.
mermaids. So what is the true version? Is there a true version?
Yeah,
And how
there's
did
absolutely a true version, which there is on almost all myths,
okay.
like fairies and dwarves and things. But uh, there are four primary versions of transmogrification spirits. Transmogrification spirits are what we would call shapeshifters. And the most popular um, are weir spirits. That's where we get a werewolf or a weir fox or a weir jaguar. In Africa, they have jaguars. But anyway, weir spirits, W-E-R-E, they're spirits that have the capability of transmogrifying bodies into um, wolves and lions and mammals, basically, uh, that are predators. So that's a weir spirit. A mere spirit, it's an aquatic spirit, and it has the power to change human forms into mermaids. That's where that comes from. Or in Africa, a lot of times you'll hear about a crocodile spirit or an alligator spirit where it'll be, they don't look like normal. They never look normal, but it looks like a crocodile type being with a big snout. But it started off being a warlock, right? And it transmogrified into a crocodile. And so, but that would be a mere spirit. And the mermaids are more famous because they're the sirens and they're the thing that's not true about them is that they just temporarily appear beautiful from the waist up, but they're actually very vicious, ugly, cannibalistic spirits. And if you follow any of the myths of mermaids, they always kill people and tear their throats out. But anyway, they're not these beautiful things, that would make a happy life with a sailor. But
Right.
anyway,
God for him.
so there are weird spirits, there are mere spirits, there are air spirits spelled A-E-R-E, and that's like Vladimir Dracula and things that happen, Mothman, and things that happen a lot in African countries as well. And they can fly. They turn into bats and stuff. It happens in central Mexico. But anyway, and then there are the reptilians, and they turn into snakes and things like that. So anyway, that's I could tell you stories about mere spirits and what they do. And that transmogrification can happen almost instantly, really quickly, especially if they've done it a number of times before with the same body. It can happen. It happened with David Hogan. He was chasing a little girl that had cut some people open and eaten their heart. She's a 15-year-old girl. And that's the Quetzalcoatl ritual that it's featured on
Aztec.
Acapulco, not Acapulco, Apocalypto, the movie Apocalypto, where
Yeah.
they sacrificed 50,000 humans to dedicate the Temple of the Sun, and people going demonic still do that in Mexico. They'll slit them right under the rib cage and reach in and pull out their heart and eat their heart while it's still beating. So it's really gnarly blood sacrifice. But she had done that, and she admitted to David that she was doing it, and that the devil made her do it. And suddenly she jumped up and ran from him, and he was chasing her to try to cast the spirit out of her. And she dove into a pond, and her mother, who her father was a warlock, but her mother was wanting her to be free. And she said, "Oh, she got away from you." And David said, "She didn't get away from me. It's a little pond. I'll wait for her to come out." He said, "No, she won't surface for days." And he said, "Is there a cave under there? That how's she going to breathe?" And she said, "Oh, she changes into a fish type thing. She'll be in there for days." And so he just went home. But anyway, though, and then I have another friend who had dealt with a mermaid. I've not dealt with a mermaid, though I've dealt with werewolves. And they also in Mexico, they turn into boars, pigs, with big
Oh, weird pig. Yeah.
Weird pig, yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
so there I
So
guess the question
strange.
is did God create an angel or spirit to rule the water and that got changed or something got morphed?
Oh, sorry. She wants to know if there's a heavenly version. That's
Yeah,
what
if there's a
she's-
godly
that's what she's
version
asking.
of the idea of a mermaid. That was the really big question.
I haven't seen anything like that, but I think that there's usually a godly version of all those kind of things. And I think the best example that you'll identify with is I have seen in the dream state, which we could talk about a lot, but I have seen beasts. I didn't see a mermaid, but I saw a really awesome flying leopard and a flying tiger, and I saw a dragon type creature, but you could tell it was noble and awesome and terrifying. I mean, it was just amazing. And anyway, those things were coming out of heaven to help us in a spiritual fight. But something that I think you'll identify with is the imagery of the Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe and the Chronicles of Narnia, and particularly J.R.R. Tolkien. In their writing and their conversations back and forth, both of those authors were seers, and they saw things that nobody would believe, and so they put them into story form. And J.R.R. Tolkien said to C.S. Lewis, "Isn't it sad that people are more inclined to believe what they think is a myth than what someone witnesses as the truth?" But the reason I tell you that is he saw all kinds of beings, and of course, Chronicles of Narnia are the same thing. That there were beings that were like good and bad, minotaurs and centaurs and different things. Now, some people think that because of the separation prohibitions in the Old Testament that God wouldn't mix things, but I just think God can do whatever he wants to do, and if it's a cool idea, he's probably done it, like right? I mean, why not make a lion that can fly? It's a cool idea. Yeah. So I believe in that. Of course, one thing that people don't want to talk about is the fact that unicorns are mentioned 6 times in the Bible. Unicorns. And people say, "Oh, that's a wild ox." No, there's another word for a wild ox, which is also mentioned in the Bible. but a unicorn is a unicorn is a unicorn. And you have exalted my strength like the strength of the horn of a unicorn. I mean, you know, uh, that is a pretty straightforward statement. And it's not a wild ox because David knew what wild oxes were. So anyway, I'm a little different on that. I've seen so many wild things that when somebody says, "Oh, you're never going to believe this," it's like, hit me with your best shot, baby.
Yeah.
You have no idea.
You have no idea what I might believe because it's a big universe out there. And remember, the creator has been busy doodling for millions and millions and millions of years, right? He just makes stuff.
Yes.
So who knows what all is out there?
Yeah, it's really interesting that you brought up the unicorn because I literally was talking about it too.
Honestly, I
Because my
kind
art
of wondered if
teacher-
it meant like a rhino or something, but I'll try to damper it here, but go
But
on.
I just
Sorry.
wanted to say it's because my art teacher, I went to a Christian high school, prep high school, and so it was, and my art teacher, he actually said to me, he says, there are unicorns in the Bible, but I'm
Yeah.
not telling you where because I spent way too long, he's passed now, but I spent way too long looking for it. So,
Yeah.
yeah, so he got he was
Yeah.
into all of the, man, he would be loving
Yeah.
where we
And
are
and
now.
also when God talks about the dragon of the deep, he's bragging about it and saying, I made him to play. And his mouth kindles a flame of fire. No man can oppose him. And his scales repel the strongest swords. That's a pretty amazing creature he's talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's Leviathan, the Leviathan passage. But anyway, there's a lot of things we don't know about, but it's a lot better to say we don't know about them than to get off into the column of things made up,
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Well, thank you, Pastor Dave. I could talk to you
Yes,
for hours.
I know.
Both of us could.
We gotta let you
And
go.
we got a part two. I guess this is part two. We got
We
part
might
three.
need to
We got
split this.
just gonna keep booking you. There's so many things I'd love to talk more about, but thank you so much.
You're
for
very welcome. It's always fun to talk to you. And next time you come out to there's only two coasts, the East Coast and the Best Coast.
Oh, I see.
But
It's a matter
when
of
you come out,
perspective. I
you're
don't
going to
know.
have to come out because there's going to be a great revival here anytime
For
soon.
sure, we're coming out.
But anyway, we'll have a good time then. Call anytime. It's fun to talk to you.
thank you everybody for watching. I
Yes.
hope you've had a good time with us here, and we'll definitely we'll have Pastor
Definitely
Dave
have
on
any more
again.
questions.
Yeah, drop questions in the comments below. We'll link the books and stuff that he mentioned.
Yes.
And well, I'm just processing still. We're having a good time. So thank
Awesome.
you.
All right, my friends. Good to
You're
talk to you again. Bye-bye.